It's a great evening we're going to have here. For those of you not familiar, my name is Andrew Lawton. I'm the host of the creatively titled Andrew Lawton Show on AM 980. I want to thank, first off, the co-sponsors of this evening, the Freedom Party of Ontario, as well as the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow. I think we all owe them a round of applause for making this evening happen. And it's one of these things that is such a unique event, and I want to say a couple of things here before we move on to the speakers we have, as well as the main event, which is obviously the screening of the Honor Diaries. It's such an honor to be here and have the opportunity. I know when the organizers came to me, they said, Andrew, we want to have, a talented, intelligent radio broadcaster, and Bob Metz said no, so they asked me to come. And it was so great that I had the opportunity to do this. And interestingly enough, for those who did not hear earlier today, I actually had the distinct honor of having Salim Mansur and Raheel Raza, two of our guests of honor anyway, on the radio show this afternoon. And it was quite amusing because you get to know a lot of the listeners, and even the ones who don't write out to you on a regular basis. Sometimes they'll say hello to you at events and whatnot. And I got a couple of emails following the interview, and I have to commend Salim especially. I'm sorry, Raheel, you weren't targeting the email, but Salim, I have to commend you on you being such a rampant Islamophobe as the speaker that you are. It's amazing when you can strike the balance of hating yourself on radio and convincing people. It's such a great skill to be able to have. And interestingly enough, I am a bit of a rare breed, and that's probably for the better of the world, but in a lot of ways, the reason is I'm not afraid to talk about the I word. I'm not afraid to talk about Islam. I'm not afraid to talk about honor killings. I'm not afraid to talk about really anything, and perhaps that's my own naivety to the realities of the world, but a lot of it is because of frustration. I'm so used to being told, you can't say that, you can't say that, and you can say that, but you're not allowed to say it that way. And it just seems to be a little bit absurd. And I'm sure there was a time in my life, in my career, when I started to think, maybe I'll do this political correctness thing. But it gets tiring. It gets tiring to remember which words are offensive, which words are politically incorrect. Heck, the BBC just 2 days ago declared the one word that is now politically incorrect and not valid. The word is girl. For those of you not familiar, someone mentioned the word girl, and they edited it out of the broadcast because that's offensive, because she's not a woman. That you need to say women. And I think when we're talking about the issue we're talking about today, we are talking about girls. We're talking about girls who are denied their right to liberty. We're talking about girls who are denied the right to dignity. We're talking about girls, women, young women, children, infants around the world who, for whatever reason or another, by way of creed, by way of religion, by way of culture, are treated as second-class citizens. And what I find funny is that discussion, that conversation, is Islamophobic. How? Why? Why are we scared of anything? Why are we scared of something we want to criticize? And we're not criticizing the religion, we're criticizing instances where that religion is at odds with human rights. And like Raheel said on my show earlier today, human rights is not a controversy. Human rights is not something that should be debated. It should be something that's accepted as an inherent fact. And it's not. But let's look at the reality. Let's look at the circumstances facing Canada. We have potentially, heaven forbid, the next Prime Minister of Canada who believes that terrorists who act in the name of Islam are misunderstood. That's Justin Trudeau. That is the ethos of the Liberal Party, but not just the Liberal Party, that's the ethos of the Liberal country. In the small L sense, people that believe that terrorists, people who inflict harm knowingly on people in the name of religion are just somehow misunderstood. That's what this is to him. And I wanted to actually go to a quote that came in a media report on CNN and a lot of other media outlets. For those of you who weren't familiar with this, there was actually a bombing in Belgium at the Jewish Museum on Saturday. And the Deputy Prime Minister responded to this. A bombing, a calculated, premeditated bombing, moments after it happened by saying it was, quote, haphazard. And by saying that this could potentially give rise to people thinking anti-Semitism is a thing. This is what we are up against. This is what we are up against. And, we invited everyone in local and regional media here. Put up your hand if you're here from the media. We got one. Herman Gooden, round of applause. And you know, in a lot of ways, it's shameful, but it's enlightening. It's shameful that we have a media that's not prepared to report on this, that we have a citywide media given days of notice to this that doesn't want to report on it. But at the same time, we also know where the agendas lie. We also know where the priorities lie. Those of you may be familiar with a woman by the name of Ingrid Mattson. Ingrid Mattson is the chair of Islamic Studies at Huron University College. Now, the movement that led to her being there, a lot of the people in the room were aware of this before it even happened, and aware of where the money came from. And I don't want to get into that tonight, but there was a legitimate question to be asked about why she was there, who was paying for it, and what that means. The London Free Press ran up a story about her, calling her the bridge builder, ignoring the ties to organizations linked to terror. The London Free Press has not written about any of the questionable relationships that perhaps the police chaplain and imam of one of the Islamic centers in London has had. They don't write about that. Instead, they write about a new imam to the London Muslim Mosque and talk about him being a bridge builder. And I'm not saying these things aren't true, but I'm saying that we're only seeing one side of the story from the media that is supposed to speak for all of us. And in a lot of ways, I have to say on the alternative, I'm kind of glad that the CBC's not here because it means I don't need to speak slowly. But when it comes down to it, $1.1 billion of taxpayer money, and apparently they don't work evenings. It's one of these things where the reason I'm here is to facilitate people who are much smarter, much brighter, and certainly much more connected to this issue that more people need to be. So I want to commend all of you for being here, and I want to thank our sponsors for the evening and the speakers who are going to be hearing from later on. There's going to be a panel following the screening, but obviously one of the sponsors of this evening is the Freedom Party of Ontario leader, also a candidate in the riding of London Fanshawe, who's going to say a few words. Paul McKeever, come on up.
Thank you, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, I am the leader of the Freedom Party, and thanks Andrew, for that nice introduction. How important this documentary is, and how proud we are at Freedom Party to have a part in co-sponsoring it. This evening's screening, by simple coincidence, comes around at a moment when Ontario is in the thick of a general election and Freedom Party is up to its neck in it. But this coincidence highlights the foundation of Freedom Party's efforts. A commitment to political freedom through rational governance, which recognizes that the laws of the land rightly are made by human beings for human beings, that government is the hand of the people and serves only the governed. In other words, a principled commitment to political freedom defended by democracy. That principled commitment is held by Freedom Party candidates in this election, including Salim Mansur. I'm sure you'll find him in the crowd later on. He's running for us in London North Centre. Al Gretzky, who's your candidate in London West, and Claire Maloney in Elgin Middlesex, London, and myself in London Fanshawe. And as I understand it, the central, indeed the defining, historic, and epical struggle Muslims face in the world is a struggle for freedom, for individual rights, and for gender equality. And opposing that struggle are those who seek to undermine freedom by undermining democracy, by those who would replace the laws made by human beings with a theocratic dictatorship, allegedly founded upon Sharia, for the benefit of some, to the detriment of others, for the freedom of none. But democracy alone is just a tool. The struggle by Muslims for freedom, defended by democracy, is attacked by theocrats who resort to terrorism, but terrorism is not their only tool. Ballots and journalism can be as effective as bullets, and there are enemies of democracy who nonetheless participate in elections only so as to undermine it, and thereby to deprive everyone, and especially women, as we'll see tonight, of the freedom that they have to think, to choose, and to act peacefully. The war against democracy and freedom is being fought in the Middle East, it's true, but it likewise is being fought right here in Canada. There are those in our midst, right here in Canada, who, while taking their freedom for granted, have moved to censor, to silence those Muslims who are in the vanguard of this struggle for freedom in the world of Islam and among Muslims, without any doubt, the bravest and most indomitable voices for freedom are those of Muslim women. It's truly shameful how the media, the universities, political parties, many of whom were invited to co-sponsor this event but who declined, and other responsible individuals in the West, and right here in Ontario, indeed right here in London, have buckled under the pressures of political correctness and multiculturalism and identity politics, all to deny these women the platform from which they can speak and to tell us about their struggle, their daily indignities, and their oppression in a culture that treats women as less than men, indeed, as chattels of men. As we have watched the horrors of the Taliban in Afghanistan, the savagery of the theocrats in Iraq, in Syria, in Egypt, in Pakistan, in Libya, in Mauritania, in just about every country that is a Muslim-majority state. And even as I speak, we are worried about some 300 kidnapped young girls, probably sold to slavery, or forcefully married off by the men of Boko Haram in Nigeria. But we in Freedom Party take the struggle of Muslim men and women for liberty in their society and culture most seriously. We will support them unequivocally. We stand with them. We salute them, and we pledge that should we form a government, or should we have our members elected to the legislature, we will be the one party that will not, ever, surrender or bend to political correctness on this issue. We will not compromise or shade our support for the cause of freedom and our democracy right here in our midst, and wherever the yearning for freedom calls upon us for giving the moral and political support that we can lend. Now, I would be remiss if not to point out that in my closing comments that by sharing with you that I have had the opportunity to sit with Raheel Raza, who is somewhere in the audience here tonight. She and I have sat on a panel held by Christine Williams on her various television programs over the years. And she's always impressed me with her honesty and her bravery, her integrity, and her commitment to freedom and equality. She's a proud Canadian. She's one of the Muslim women featured in this evening's documentary. And she, together with Sun host Ezra Levant, are asking for contributions to raise the $10,000 needed to buy the non-exclusive rights to broadcast this documentary over the Sun News Network over the coming year. So if, after watching this film tonight, you agree that more Canadians need to see it, please consider helping the effort by contributing to the fund that Raheel and Ezra are putting together to make sure that Canadians right across Canada will get the same experience that you do tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that, Paul McKeever. Now, as was mentioned when you were initially invited to this event after the screening, it's not just a movie. You're actually going to have the opportunity to hear a panel discussion about what was in the film and certainly the broader issue. And one of the people on that panel you'll see in this film, and many of you are no doubt familiar with her, and that is Raheel Raza, as well as Christine Williams. Is not in the movie, but she graces us with her presence here tonight. And we're also going to have Salim Mansur. So if I could get all three of them just to stand up for a moment, and I want to just show these people and give them a round of applause for their bravery in speaking out on this. Thank you. Now, without further ado, we are going to get to the main event here, but I just wanted to mention one final comment here, which is it's a serious point that we're talking about here. I want you to take this in. We're going to be taking questions during the panel. I want you to, if you have them, ask them, but this is not a problem that will be solved overnight by the people in this room, but it's a problem that government does need to respond to. It's a government, as I was saying earlier, that media needs to respond to. And when we look at people like the man who murdered Aqsa Parvez, the media isn't interested in paying attention to the level they would if it were something that happened, like what happened in California just the other day, for example. The media has an agenda. It's not conspiratorial to suggest that. It's very real. If Aqsa Parvez's father had written a $1,700 check to the Marconi Club, you wouldn't stop hearing about it. And that's the painful reality in which we live. So without further ado, the Honor Diaries.
There has never been a better time than now to turn the tide and to actually find solutions for the problems that are faced. So the first thing we need to do is support those women, our sisters who are fighting for their rights in parts of the Muslim world.
How would we feel if these were our sisters, our daughters, our mothers?
There's so many unmet needs and so much yet to be done. There's a lot of great efforts, but we have very good friends.
Under the Taliban, almost no girls went to school. Now, nearly 3 million do.
The Taliban shot me on the left side of my forehead. They thought that the bullet would silence us, but they failed. And out of that silence came thousands of voices. Weakness, fear, and hopelessness died. Strength, power, and courage.
It would be wonderful if all women's organizations understood what this is about and how large it can be.
People of all backgrounds need to pay attention to this and really understand that they can get involved, they can do their parts, they can voice their opinion, and they can truly make a difference.
We need systematic change in the Muslim world so millions of women are not daily victims of misogyny, systematic, institutionalized misogyny.
Well, that was absolutely wonderful. So if I can now take this opportunity to invite our panelists to come down to the stage, and hopefully by some magical feat, the screen will rise up so we can see the panelists. I don't know who's, we don't know if we hire anyone to do that, union rules and all that, but there we go, the screen's going up. Whoever's up there, a round of applause for them. So I want to thank, first of all of you for staying for the movie. We are going to have a panel discussion. Now, we actually have a very special celebrity mic stand holder, Al Gretzky, down here will be standing down here. So if you have a question you'd like to ask the panel, please do come on down here. And we will have Raheel Raza, Christine Williams, and Salim Mansur join us momentarily here. Thank you, Al. We're doing well. Our panelists are making their way down. Where's Salim? Salim in the room? Oh, there he is. Perfect. I just want to introduce the panelists here in a moment. And really phenomenal movie. I hadn't seen it before today. I had seen snippets of it here and there, but to see the whole thing was absolutely wonderful. Frankly, I think that's the only movie I've ever seen with Angelina Jolie that I enjoyed. So I didn't realize when I got the biographies of the speakers that Raheel Raza had co-starred with Nicole Kidman and Meryl Streep before. So that's definitely quite an honor. And the movie also put in context the incident we happened earlier today when I made the mistake of sneaking up on her and got pepper sprayed. So so great to have him here. Raheel Raza, as you saw, is the president of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow. She's an internationally renowned speaker, author, journalist. She's done so much. Salim is in the middle. I feel bad for what's coming for you, sir. So Raheel Raza is obviously one panelist we've seen in the movie. Salim Mansur is the London North Centre candidate for the Freedom Party of Ontario, but his resume extends years beyond that. He's a professor at the Western University now. He's also written articles, books all over. He's certainly been a voice that people in London should know and people in this country should know. And Christine Williams as well, an award-winning journalist, TV host, producer. She's done everything under the sun, and more importantly, a little bit of an inside information here. She was my travel buddy to Israel a couple of years ago, and she somehow managed to not get me deported, so I thank her for that. So all panelists, thank you so much, and as I mentioned, if you have a question, please come down, and Al Gretzky has the microphone here. But first off, I wanted to ask all of you on this panel, there's a microphone on the table there, we'll have to practice your sharing, but I wanted to direct the first question towards Raheel. And one of the questions that came up during the movie was this dispute versus whether or not the honor question. What we saw in the movie is an impact of culture or religion. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on your position on that.
First of all, I really want to thank everyone who's come out here this evening. I want to thank the Freedom Party, Marilu, Emilio, and everyone else who's helped. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Andrew, as well, for the interview. In response to your question, it is definitely a combination of both. And you know that very often there is a very fine line between culture and religion. And what people practice as culture, there's sometimes it morphs into justification through the religion. And in this case, this is exactly what has happened. However, there is a line in the documentary that says culture is no excuse for abuse. And we often remind people that Honor Diaries is not about religion or culture. It's not about faith or ethnicities or color of the skin. It is about human rights. And human rights are something that we all have in common. We may have different faiths, cultures, ethnicities, but we all connect at human rights. And if we care about the human rights of our fellow human beings, then this is something that should and will impact us. I'll very quickly share with you that this is about the 25th time that I'm seeing this documentary. I've been traveling with this around the world. And even now when I see it, it hits me. You know, it's so powerful because we're just watching this on the screen. But 2 days ago, a young 23-year-old woman was stoned to death in Pakistan in an honor killing. While the police stood and watched, while the crowd stood and watched, we know about Boko Haram and those girls. So it's no longer just a topic that is being put into a film. It is a reality that we are seeing on the ground. So whether it's culture or religion, it's wrong.
And Salim, I have to ask you then, you've obviously seen a lot of the same, you've seen the movie obviously, and you've talked to a lot of the people who've been in the movie and I've known. What's your take looking at this? Obviously you weren't involved in the production, but do you see anything that surprises you, given your understanding of the world before that movie?
No, nothing surprises me. But what struck me, and struck me so powerfully as I sat through this, is the way 9 of you came together. Probably you did not know anyone before you shot this. And how the story, that is a story daily of the indignities, of the abuse, of the way women are treated as one half of the population. We're talking here about the Muslim world, but it could be also talking about India, because there was this woman just witnessing. We could also be talking about women in China, women in Southeast Asia. But let me talk simply as the Muslim world. Daily, these indignities that go on. Who are these people who are suffering every moment that we are here sitting and talking about this? Even as we are talking, these are going. They are our mothers. They are our sisters. They are our better halves of life, as we say. They become our partners. They are our daughters. We're not talking about aliens. That is the most striking thing. You know, each one of us have a story, and I think everyone in this room has a story. And so that's what struck me, that here was for the first time, at least for the first time in my recent memory, the memory from 9/11, shall we say, that these women came together in some North American city that was not identified, and so we leave that unidentified. But it was done here. It could only be done here. It could only be done in a place where you could breathe. You know, I'm every moment reminded of Elias Kennedy's line, that the origin of freedom lies in breathing. That you could breathe. That's what the story is, that you could breathe, and it could be done here. It could not be done in Pakistan. It could not be done in Saudi Arabia. It could not be done in any of the 57 OIC countries that is suffocating us in the United Nations. That it could only be done here. But the terrible other side, as I was sitting and watching this, and you know, we can spend the whole hour that we spend watching the movie talking about it. It comes down to it, what do I, sitting here in Canada, what can we do? I think that is it, what it is, the issue that we are all confronted with. We are immobilized by that question. What can we do? And I don't want to take too much time because this question is in my mind, and you raised this question. And before I proceed, I must thank you, Andrew. You have shown a sort of a courage, that is, you have raised the issue of freedom and wrapped it around yourself. You know, you were not intimidated, and you raised the issue in AM 980. It was done today on Just Right. And though Raheel has thanked the people who have shown up, I am dismayed how many haven't shown up in a free country like ours. I am dismayed. Where are the people? Where is the media? Where is the media? This London Free Press that calls itself Free Press. It should be called London Muzzle Press. Where is London Free Press? Where is CTV? Where is CBC reporters? I am dismayed. And so I ask myself the question, you know, have we become so nonchalant? Have we lost the perspective of who we are as human beings, as individuals? And so that's the question of what can we do. And I don't want to hug the mic, I give it to Kristen William, but before I lose the thought, we can do this. In Canada, we can do this. We can do, as you raised it on the radio, and I pointed this out, in the mid-1970s, during the height of the Cold War, when the whole world was buckling under the threat of the Soviet Union and the arms race, it was simply one senator that stood up. And we have forgotten that in the United States. Senator Henry Jackson, and said there will be no favored status given to the Soviet Union. There will be no deal with the Soviet Union and the communist bloc. We will engage in nothing with them. And that led to the Helsinki Treaty. And then the rest is history. That is, the Soviet bloc countries were all signatories to the United Nations, that the universal Declaration of Human Rights is not words to be inscribed in some wall and taught in some course on international relations and then walk out. The Charter of Human Rights and Freedom in Canada is not something that we pay, you know, our respect someday on July the 1st and forget it about 364 days more. The Helsinki Agreement was that you better honor your deal. And the rest is history. Solzhenitsyn was taken off, Sharansky left, freedom was acknowledged, and then in about, what, less than 20 years? There is no Soviet Union. Why is Canada not leading the charge of another Helsinki Agreement? That we will not trade, we will not allow any immigration, we will not tolerate anymore you 57 countries, you sitting in the United Nations, if you don't live up to the values of the United Nations. We are the signatory of the United Nations. Our Canadian John Humphreys was the author of the Universal Human Declaration of Rights, you know. So we can do it. We can do it. You know, we're going to have this election on June 12th, that is 6 days after the 70th anniversary of the D-Day. 70th anniversary, 70 years ago, men went from Canada to bring freedom. All we are asking, live up to your commitment of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you know, and we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim. See, this is the benefit. We don't have commercial breaks tonight, so I don't have to interrupt a good rant there. Thank you for that, Salim. We are going to get to questions more shortly, but I wanted to ask you, Christine, because your presence at this event is particularly unique because you are not from this community that is affected by this most. So what is it that you find so important to be passionate about and to be up here with us tonight?
I'll tell you, I started out in the early 80s being an investigative news reporter, covering crime and politics. It eventually led me, to make a long story short, to CTS TV, where I was a producer, host, and, well, we won several awards there for 14 years. Since then, life has changed, and in answer to Andrew's question, I started out writing a book that is commissioned by Dr. Daniel Pipes 3 years ago. It was a journey in itself. It's coming out soon. But Salim, Raheel are two members of that particular book as interviewees. And it is about Modern Islam and the Rise of Islamic Reformists. What I found out on that journey was quite surprising, and a lot of it had to do with the attitudes that I saw in the world, in Canada. I was getting it from all sides. Some people were telling me, well, Christine, why are you doing this? Is there anything such as a moderate Muslim? If it's a moderate Muslim, then this person cannot be a Muslim at all, because they're not obeying the Quran in its entirety, so therefore they can't be a Muslim. So how could you even advocate that there's such a thing as a moderate Muslim? Now, my answer goes back related to what Salim Mansur was just saying, and it's about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It surprises me how many people have not read that declaration. One part of that declaration gives a person the right to practice the faith of their choice. And let's hold that thought for a moment. When I look at some of the thinking out there when it comes to pointing a finger at genuine Muslims that we see sitting right beside us here, that are also fighting for our constitution and our democracy, you hear voices like, well, they're not even regarded as Muslims by their own people. Well, who are their people? The Wahhabists? Since when are we the voices of Wahhabists? Since when are we to be dictated by Wahhabists on who is and who is not a Muslim? So that is one aspect of what interested me. Another thing that took me along this journey was I have since become the Public Affairs and Media Advisor to the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. I take up the Christian cause. I take up the rights well, again, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, one of justice. And if there's one thing that moderates recognize is Israel's right to exist. You asked the question, they asked the question, why shouldn't Israel exist? This tiny country, surrounded by so many enemy states, why shouldn't it exist? So that is another interest of mine. Another thing, and I'm not speaking at all on behalf of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, but I'm also a director on that foundation, which is tied into human rights. We look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and as Salim rightfully said, the author of that, the first person that drafted that was John Humphreys, a Canadian. We also happen to be the first country in the world that enshrined in our Constitution that actually became an act, the Multicultural Act. We're the First Nation. So we ask ourselves, if Canada is such a leader when it comes to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, when it comes to multiculturalism, which absolutely has become a problem today, then why aren't we taking more of a leadership today when it comes to advocating human rights in the world, particularly when it comes to women, as we saw in this film? Now, going back to multiculturalism a little bit, because I was asked here tonight to shed some light on the whole issue of what's happening with multiculturalism in this country. I do see a big problem with multiculturalism, but if you go back to when Trudeau first endorsed it, made a speech in 1971, he talked about the problem that we faced in Canada with having two identities, English Canada and French Canada. And many of you are old enough, I see, to remember the days of the FLQ, the problem that we faced with French nationalism in this country, the separatists and so forth. And Trudeau was given a lot of credit, which he should have, in controlling this strong separatist force. But when you go back to when multiculturalism was enshrined, much of his intent back then was to water down the nationalism that we saw with the French in this country. And he realized that there was an expansion in this country to include the ethnic population, and that's what it was seen back then, as the ethnic population. And we've come a long way since then. Trudeau was actually asked, following Multicultural Act, is this what you really envisioned? And his answer, and that is to be found in the Ottawa Citizen in many publications, he said no. That was not his intent. We look at the Multicultural Act. The intent of the Multicultural Act was to tie in human rights as it is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Equal rights for all under our Constitution, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Christian, a Hindu, whatever race you might be, whether you're Chinese, black, white, it didn't matter what you were. It was intended that Canada supported humanity according to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. But since then, we've seen something terrible happen in this country. We've been hijacked, folks. We've been hijacked by Islamism. And the friends that we have today sitting beside me here, the ones that are telling you what's going on in Friday Mosque, the hatred against Christians and Jews, they're telling us what's going on under Sharia law. These are the voices to listen to, but instead we have a new group that has come into this country. And to even criticize any aspect of Islam is deemed Islamophobic. And there's a quote I'd like you to hear that I've actually written down for you. This was by Abdurrahman Muhammad. He's a former member of the International Institute for Islamic Thought. He was there when the term Islamophobia was formalized. This is what he said. Since leaving that institute and realizing what they were made of, he's turned his back on that institute. Quote, "This loathsome term Islamophobia is nothing more than a thought-terminating cliche conceived in the bowels of Muslim think tanks for the purpose of beating down critics. The biggest problem I see today when it comes to this term Islamophobia is that our entire country is under siege. We have become Islamophobic against Islamists. We are fearful of Islamists, and that is the phobia that I see. And in terms of journalism, where are the journalists today? Why are they here? Why are they dealing with this hijacking of our society, our great nation? That is my biggest question as a journalist.
A couple of people asking questions. I just want to make one point. This was in response to something that was echoed by a couple of the panelists, which was about the Islamic community's view of the two Muslims we have sitting up here. And we actually had across the hall before the event, you would have passed them on the way in, two representatives from the London Muslim Mosque, which is about, for those of you not from London, about 6 minutes from here and whatnot. And I was really excited. I thought, wow, the local Muslim community has come out to see Honor Diaries. The local Muslim community has come out to see a movie that affects that community. I wanted to make sure that they knew just precisely what was going on here, so I went over, I introduced myself. Fatal mistake. Shouldn't have told them my name. That instantly made one of them not a fan. And I said, you should come. We have two prominent Muslim speakers. It's a movie about honor and how it relates to the world, and I said we have obviously a component that is heavily focused on Islam, and I don't see them. If you're here, I apologize. Maybe they came for a few minutes and left, but they didn't come. It wasn't the weather, it wasn't the traffic, it wasn't the parking. They were 6 feet away and didn't want to come. That speaks volumes about what these three individuals are up against on a daily basis. I'll start with one question over here. Oh, sorry, Raheel.
I just want to mention they had some coffee and cookies and then they left.
Okay, I guess they were halal, all right. Start with a question over there.
I'm a proud Canadian, and I tell you, I'm not afraid of Islam, and I don't believe in Islamism. I think the problem is Islam. You asked why the 23-year-old woman was stoned. She was stoned because of Islam. And the humanities question, the human rights issue that you're talking about, the human rights issue is the right to be free from Islam. Every individual has the right to be free from the totalitarianism of Islam. Nobody should be afraid to say that. And the problem we have with culture, I saw this real discussion going on in your movie, people struggling with the idea whether it was ideology or culture. In Western culture, we have politics is downstream from culture. In totalitarian Islam, it's the opposite. Its culture is downstream from politics, and that's where you find your answer. You're going to have to fight the ideology of Islam. You're going to have to get rid of its political influence. And to any of your panelists who were struggling with the religious idea of Islam, do they understand that Islam is politics? It's the politics that was hatched by Muhammad 1400 years ago.
Well, I'll give them an opportunity to answer that. I mean, the question of Islam versus Islamism is one. Whomever wants to take that one can start with that.
The question that the gentleman has asked, or rather the comments that he has posed, to do honor or honestly to deal with them will take us all night. Yeah, more than all night. But it is his right, and the right of anybody else, to define and say what he has said. And it is my right as a Muslim to say he's wrong. It will be 3 years from now We are in May of 2014. In April of 2017, we, the world, of course the world, most of us don't live in history, but those who are aware of this, and I hope the gentleman who asked this question is aware of this, that he's not, one of those who walk with airbrush history. 2017 will mark the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther penning the 95 Theses on the gates of the Church of Wittenberg. We don't have the time to discuss what happened after that. 500 years of history that had a precedent before Martin Luther penned it. John Wycliffe, John Huss, and all of that had happened, and the struggle that went on. But the pinning of the 95 Theses and that what followed with Martin Luther led to his trial, his standing up, and the famous appearance of Martin Luther at the Diet of Worms, where he simply said, "Here I stand." What was raised against him was the entire force of Christianity, led by the Pope as the head of the Christian church. There was no Protestant church. This was the Catholic church. And all he said was, "Here I stand. I have the right to explain and understand and define how I see and read the Bible, how I understand Jesus. This is my conscience, and I challenge the Vatican and I challenge the Pope to do what it wants to do. But here I stand." I don't want to go into the history of the Galileo and all the others. So here I stand. If you understand history, sir, it took 500 years, it's not over. The struggle is with the religion that has a text, a sacred text. Jews, Christians, and Muslims are based upon a sacred text. And if you understand anything, sir, it is about how the text is read. And the text is read many different ways, right? And that's the struggle we are engaged in. This whole conflation of Sharia to the Quran is a man-made construction. It is a construction of the 9th, 10th century thinking, of the 8th century thinking. Raheel is engaged in struggling to bring her family into the 21st century, and the gentleman says, "I know better than you." It's like the world of Islam in 1517 saying, "We know better than you Christians. Martin Luther is an apostate. Hang him." But that's the equivalence we are engaged in. The right to define, understand, explain, rewrite is our fundamental right. It is not the right of any professor. It's not the right of any Sheikh al-Qaradawi. It is not the right of any Imam Khomeini. It is not the right of anyone to say what is Islam. It is my right to define what is Islam, and we're going to fight that struggle. We are in the 21st century. Thank you.
I'm going to bring the conversation back to Honor Diaries, and I want to share something very positive with you. I don't know if you're aware of this. There have been over 500,000 screenings of Honor Diaries globally. And we have a very short time tonight, so I do want to share with you some action items. As you heard in the film, each one of you can do something, and it would be really appreciated if you share the word, spread the word, because we want to create awareness. This was screened at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. I was there, it was screened inside the council. Unfortunately, the OIC countries did not attend, but there were Muslim NGOs that did attend. We had a screening in Ottawa where Mrs. Harper came to attend along with other dignitaries, and it was much appreciated. Nazanin Afshin-Jan came to that screening. It has been screened at the House of Commons in London, England. I shall be going to a screening in Brussels at the EU. So it has had an enormous impact. There is an Arabic Facebook page for Honor Diaries which has had more than 100,000 likes. So it's not that the Muslim community has not jumped in. There have been a lot of responses. It's being screened in places like Egypt, in Pakistan, in India, not perhaps in a theater like this, but in homes. And that is what we want. We want screenings, 10 people, 5 people, schools, colleges. What we want is for this film to be seen by every student in Canada. Every high school should show this film so that young women know what the dangers are. And that is what we are lobbying for. Anything you can do to help, you can email me at any time. There's a card outside that says call to action. And most importantly, you can get on Ezra Levant's website, which is called Get This on TV, and help bring this to Sun Television so everyone can see it. And that would be much appreciated. We have a question here.
Thank you. Well, actually, we have two, and obviously, let's try to keep them focused on Honor Diaries for time's sake. First question goes up there.
First of all, thank you for a very powerful film with a very interesting group of women speaking from personal experience about misogynistic, patriarchal violence. And one of those women, by the way, of course, is the wife of our Minister of Justice, Peter McKay. My question is directed primarily to Raheel. What is your impression of the response of Western feminists to this misogynistic, patriarchal violence? I sense that there is a tendency, at least in some circles, to conflate this form of violence with what I might call, and it's not an entirely appropriate term, mainstream domestic violence.
Thank you for that question, Raheel.
Thank you for that question. That is an excellent question, and this has been brought up before as well. There are two parts to your question which I will address separately. Yes, there are organizations and groups of women who would like to conflate this as domestic violence. And we are very clear that this is not domestic violence. And the reason is that honor killings have a very, honor-based violence has a very specific intention behind it. It is not domestic violence that takes place between two people who are living together or married and, spousal violence. This is something that is perpetuated by a family member against a woman in the family. It is done with collusion of the family, the tribe, the larger social group. So therefore, it is a very separate issue. Now, I should share with you at this point that when we had our screening in Toronto, we had invited the largest Muslim women's group in Canada. They are funded by the government, and we invited them because we thought that this would be of interest to them. And the response I got from them was, we don't like the word honor, and we are trying to find another name for the word honor. And this comes up not once, but again and again. When Aqsa Pervez's murder happened, when the Shafia murders happened in Kingston, these groups spent a lot of time deflecting from the issue. We're talking here about the lives of girls. And you have heard it said, they could be our daughters, they could be our sisters. But their concern was the semantics of the word honor. So they will take the entire discussion, I assure you if they were here tonight, the entire discussion about should we call it honor killings or not? Yes, because the intent behind the killing is honor. And therefore we have to separate it from domestic violence. So that's the answer. In terms of the feminist groups, they're nowhere to be seen. They want to keep a big distance. There could be many reasons. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they have been threatened by Islamist organizations. Maybe they're scared. I think that they're just politically correct. They don't want to touch this issue because they want to say that this is happening to someone else. But let me remind you that it's happening in our own backyard today. And this is not a Muslim issue. This is a Canadian issue. And unless we deal with this as Canadians, we will never get beyond these abuses. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you. And I actually wanted to give Christine an opportunity to address that as well.
I do wonder, aside from where the journalists are, where are the feminists as well? Because I once worked in a shelter for, back then they called it battered women, a shelter for battered women. And I'll tell you, even when a woman came into the shelter and said, I'm being called an idiot being called stupid, being made inferior by my husband. It was regarded as psychological abuse. Many of them were also physically abused. And I wonder today, when you see Muslim women not living abroad, but even here, I mean, the Honor Diaries depicted the women in the head covering, but when you look at women whose identity is completely erased through the niqab, you go to Florida, I mean, go to Florida on vacation, 90-degree weather, 100-degree weather, they're covered in black, while their husbands and the sons are in shorts and trying to stay cool. What about the identity of these women, and why do other women not care? When women are subjugated, they are psychologically abused. These women are subjugated and they're psychologically abused. And I want to know, why do people not care about it? We talk about racism, that, the people that are screaming Islamophobia, we're being racist. Well, to me, that is the worst form of racism that I'm seeing. That nobody seems to care about Muslim women. That is the worst form of racism that I see today.
Thank you for that. We have another question down here.
My name is Susan Kassan, by the way, and I'm frequently accused by my friends of being overly optimistic. And I have taken some heart in Canada of seeing people convicted of these crimes. But what I would like to ask is, where are we, when you said, what are we going to do about this, where are we lacking? Like, can you tell us, are there gaps in the law? Are there some training of the police? Is it education in schools? What do we need to do, as Canadians to close this gap?
Thank you, Susan, for that question. It's a very important question. I should remind you that, when you talk about the gap, it's not really a gap. These are issues that have come up in the past 30 years or so. This is something that has happened because of multiculturalism, under the umbrella of multiculturalism, there's a lot of issues that have been sort of sneaked in. So there is a lot that can be done. Education is the first and most important factor. We say that we have to create awareness, we have to educate, and then we have to eradicate the abuses. But the first part is awareness, because these are baby steps. The change is not going to come overnight, and it's not going to come quickly, but we have to start somewhere. So education in schools, extremely important. This has already happened in England. Let me give you the example of the United Kingdom, where the problems of forced marriage, female genital mutilation, and honor killings were the highest in the Western world. But they actually took action. They have a helpline for women. We don't have something like that. My dream is that I would like to have a helpline, like in Karma Nirvana. We need to train our law enforcement agents, because they are not aware that these things happen. And that is also happening very slowly. In Calgary, there is some training, but it needs to be nationwide. There needs to be education of teachers so that they are aware of these issues among their students. Of medical professionals. You know that there are doctors or midwives that are performing female genital mutilation under the table right here in Canada. The first doctor to be prosecuted in the United Kingdom was last month. So when there is a prosecution in a case like this, it sets an example. After when this film was made, it was after that David Cameron made forced marriages a criminal offense in the United Kingdom. We need to do the same. It may not stop it altogether, but it does become a deterrent. So as I said, there are many levels that we need to work at. But the first and foremost is to acknowledge that the problem is there and to create awareness among Canadians that this is happening.
I'd like to also humbly recommend something from a Christian point of view. First of all, going back to what we discussed before about Islam and the problems with Islam, even when we look at the Christian scriptures in the New Testament, there's nothing in it at all that advocates violence, and I've actually been approached saying, well, it's not in our scripture, and it's not in the New Testament. But with that being said, there's something else I'd like to propose. There's a shifting target we seem to be dealing with here, and for us to start advocating, let's just eradicate Islam. Let's just get rid of the whole belief altogether, and the problem will be solved. We looked at the Honor Diaries, we saw Hirsi Ali, who has since left Islam, and she advocates completely getting rid of the whole concept of Islam altogether. In fact, that was why Brandeis University did not include her. And I don't agree with that either, because we live in a democratic land, and I believe in North American-wide and in Western constitutions, we do have that right to free speech. And I will say, based on that right, people also have rights to worship how they see fit. If you notice, she also sat down beside Raheel, who is a believer in Islam, while she is not a believer in Islam, and that is what you call true pluralism in our country, where people can sit side by side with differences of opinion, whether it be about Islam, whether it be about whatever that may be, but we are protected by a constitution and by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And until we keep our eyes on that target and stop shifting targets, let's get rid of Islam, let's get rid of this. Well, we're not going to get rid of the world's 1.6 billion Muslims. If people cannot see that, we have a real problem here. I cannot advocate having people like Salim and Raheel, who are freedom-loving, democratic-loving people, say, no, we don't want you in our country because you believe in a religion that I don't endorse. That's sounding like Islamism to me. It's sounding like totalitarianism to tell people what they're allowed to believe in. Once they believe in our Constitution and our rights, that is what our business should be, to protect our country from Sharia law and anything that looks like Sharia law, and partner with those who are trying to do the same.
Anything that is universal, Christine, is not our, it belongs to everyone. The origin of freedom lies in breathing. We breathe the air. It is not Christian air, or Hindu air, or Buddhist air, or Bolshevik air. Freedom is universal or it is meaningless. And there is no freedom if it is not individual freedom. So anyone who stands up and says, our freedom, and these people do not understand it, they are narrowing the concept of freedom. The issue that we are struggling with, which is where multiculturalism is such an utter abandonment of the great struggle, we don't have the time here to point out, but of the great struggle that has taken place in Europe and then spread from Europe, but its origin goes all the way back to ancient Greece. And that glimmer died, and then it was 2,000 years later reawoken. It's a universal concept, or it is no concept at all. And it is not denied in any religion. What has happened is people have to fight for that universal concept from those who take religion or who take any ideology or any ideas to oppress and close society. So Muslims today, my friends, as you watched it, I'm talking particularly to my non-Muslim friends, as you're watching this and you're historically conscious, as I pointed out, 500 years of history, and you have forgotten that 500 years of history, sadly what is happening in the Muslim world is a reminder to you that struggle which your ancestors fought for is being fought out today for the same ends that you now enjoy. It's what the women in Somalia, in Palestine, in Pakistan. You heard Malala Yousaf, that girl who was shot. She was not talking that this is Pakistani right. She was talking about being a human being.
Answer.
Sorry, we are just, if everyone wants to do kind of a quick sort of closing statement, we do have to wrap up though.
I'll make my closing statement now. Raheel said something very important on the Honor Diaries, and she talked about patriarchal systems. I have to say, even as a Christian and working in that shelter for battered women, even doing a talk show live daily for 8 years, we did shows on abuse. And I heard Christian women call in and actually say that I was abused, and my pastor tells me that the husband is the one that women are supposed to obey, and I should shut my mouth and take it. And I don't think there's anybody in this room that will ever condone that. And no Christian should ever put up with abuse based on how they interpret scriptures. Now, only imagine if people with that kind of a mentality were to institute that brand of religion into a government system, it will look much like Sharia law. So that is why I say that we practice our faith. I'm a Christian. I'm a strong believer in my faith. But we need to understand that we live in a freedom-loving society, and the whole purpose of multiculturalism was to honor the freedom of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, no matter what race you are. But we do not live in a patriarchy. We are not about to live under Sharia law, and we have to thank people like Salim and Raheel that kept Sharia law out of Ontario in 2003.
Thank you, and we'll give Raheel an opportunity to give a closing statement as well.
Thank you. I'm going to actually quickly answer Salim's question. Once again, it's about Honor Diaries. One of the unique facts about Honor Diaries is the fact that none of this was scripted. We were 9 women who never knew each other. We were brought together in a house in New Jersey for 2 days, and we talked, and we talked, and we talked, and that is what you saw from about 200 hours of film. It was edited down to this version where we had no scripts, we just spoke from the heart. So it is from the heart, and that's where I want you to feel this. Again, beyond religion, culture, faith, just that human rights connection. And I want each one of you to leave the room today with an idea that you're going to do something because you can. You live in a country where we are free. Many women are not. So please speak out for them. Thank you.
Yeah, Salim, you get your closing statement too.
I just cannot resist saying that, look, 2 strong women, they put me at the center. It is the women that make us men, you know, and not the other way around. Thank you so much.
All right, I want to give a big thank you to our 3 panelists, to Christine Williams, to Salim Mansur, to Raheel Raza. I also want to thank Paul McKeever, Mary Lou Ambrosio, all of the people in the Freedom Party of Ontario that made this happen, all of the people who came out, all of the people who behind the scenes have helped make this a success, and most importantly, I just want to express once again just my level of gratitude, not just for you, Raheel, but for your part in the bigger picture of making this film, and for being here today. The world owes you. Now the panelists are going to be available. Okay, so Raheel is beckoning her husband to come and take a picture. And if anyone does want to come up and take pictures, the panelists will be here for a few moments. And outside, they'll be available if you didn't get a chance to ask a question. You can chat with them out in the lobby there. But once again, paging Raheel's husband to come down on the stage. But everyone, thank you so much for coming out tonight.